Well, good morning, everyone. My name is Wesley. I'm one of the pastors here at King's Church, and glad to have you this morning as we continue in our series in John. Now, some of you know this, but if you didn't know this, I grew up in the Southeast, which is a great area to grow up. There's so much about my upbringing that I love. There's a lot of my upbringing that I've kind of put aside and grown out of now that I live in D.C. as an adult. But there are some comforts of the South that I just can never give up. There are some comforts of the South that I can never take for granted. There's one particular that I can remind myself daily of the satisfaction of when it's late at night. And there is one place in the South that can provide peace and comfort and satisfaction. You see, there's nothing like being hungry late at night, or being on a road trip in the middle of nowhere in the South, or on a holiday like Christmas or Christmas Eve, and you're hungry and you're wondering, is there any place that I can go to provide some peace and comfort? Oh, yes, there is. It is the glories of the Waffle House. Amen. Yeah. We still need a petition that DC is far enough south that we could have one of these. But look, there's nothing like the Waffle House. I mean, it's so set apart from every other competition, right? Because no matter where you are in the Southeast, it's always open. No matter what obscure little place you find yourself in, guess what? It's always perfectly mediocre. Everywhere you go. It may not be safe, as we see in this picture right here, at all, but that was a funny video. But look, it's not always safe, but guess what? It's always satisfying. That's what's so beautiful about the Waffle House. It's always there when you need it. It has a tasting menu called the All-Star that would rival any tasting menu in DC, and it's a fraction of the cost. The late Anthony Bourdain, when he went to Waffle House for the very first time, this is how he poetically described his experience. He says, "It is indeed marvelous, an irony-free zone where everything is beautiful and nothing hurts, where everybody, regardless of race, creed, or color, or degree of inebriation, is welcomed. You don't come expecting the French Laundry, but you come expecting something amazing. The warm, yellow glow is a beacon of hope, inviting the lost and the hungry across the South to come inside. It's a place of safety." I would disagree with that. It's a place of safety and nourishment. It never closes, and it is always faithful. Amen, right? If you find yourself in the Southeast one day and you're lost and you're hangry and tired, there is nothing quite like the Waffle House for you. Now, I say this as a kind of a silly example, but it's a segue to our passage today, which is filled with a lot. There's so much that we can cover today, but there's one overarching simple truth for us today, and it's more comforting than anything a Waffle House or anything else can provide for our souls this morning, and that is that Jesus is always working for you. There is never a moment where he has taken a day off for you. There is never a moment where heaven's doors are shut. There is never a moment where the throne room sleeps. There is always an open door because Jesus is at work. And he says here in this passage, he says, "My Father and I, we're working." Even on the Sabbath, even on the day where everyone else is resting, God is still working. He's still in control. And there is not a greater truth that comforts our souls this morning to know that God is never off duty, that he is always on the clock for you. He is always working. And that brings us to our main idea today, which is so simple yet so profound, is that Jesus works, and through his work we can rest. Because Jesus is working for us, because he is in control, always. Because it never rests that he is the one who is in control. He always remains faithful. He is the only one who can heal us. He is the only one who can grant true and lasting peace. And because of that, we can now take a deep breath this morning and rest. And the type of rest that we're talking about this morning is not being able to take a little siesta on a Sunday afternoon. The type of rest we're talking about is what the Bible calls a deep peace, a rest in him, that REM rest for our souls. You know that REM rest that we need, the REM, the rapid eye movement, right? It's that deep sleep that we need so that our bodies are reinvigorated, they're renewed, they're strengthened. Jesus says that he alone can provide that type of rest for your soul. And that's what this passage is actually all about, because the lame man we're going to see in just a moment who is healed causes a controversy, a conflict over the Sabbath. And the Sabbath was given to God's people as a day of rest, a day where we wouldn't labor, but we would rest. And so at the end of this passage, what we find is the Jewish leaders are looking at Jesus and saying, look, this man is healing, and he is working on the Sabbath, and Jesus is turning it on them. He's saying, no, because I'm working, you have Sabbath. It's actually my work that creates the Sabbath. And we're going to find today is, as this lame man is healed, what Jesus wants more than anything for this man is to find rest for his soul in him. What he wants more for any of us today is that the Sabbath is not just a day that we set aside, but it is actually pointing to something greater for us, a deep rest in our souls in Christ, what he has done for us. And John says that these miracles that we read about in his Gospels, they're pointers, right? They're signs. He teaches us this at the end of his Gospel. John reminds us at the end that Jesus did many miracles, but the ones that he's recounting in his Gospel are signs. What are signs? They're pointers to something. And so did these miracles happen? Absolutely. The miracle we read about, did it actually happen? Absolutely. But it's actually, John is telling us, it's actually teaching us something about who Jesus is and what he has done. It's pointing to him. It's not just something we read that happened, but it's also instructive for us today. And so as we read this text today, may it instruct us about who our God is and what he has come to do. And we're going to look at the text, we're going to divide it into two sections. Number one, we're going to see the compassion of Jesus. We're going to look at the first 15 verses. We're going to see the very character and nature of Jesus as he lovingly pursues this man to heal him. And then we're going to see the controversy that causes about Jesus, about his character, about his authority, and about what he has come to do. So the compassion of Jesus and the controversy about Jesus. Let's go ahead and dive into the text here. We find ourselves back in Jerusalem. It says, after this, there was a feast of the Jews, and Jesus went up to Jerusalem. Now there was in Jerusalem by the sheep gate a pool in Aramaic called Bethesda. So we find ourselves at this obscure place, this pool. And at this pool, it says that there laid a multitude of invalids, the blind, lame, and paralyzed. One man was there who had been an invalid for 38 years. When Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there for a long time, he said to him, "Do you want to be healed?" The sick man answered him, "Sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred, and while I'm going another steps down before me." And Jesus said to him, "Get up, take up your bed, and walk." And at once the man was healed, and he took up his bed and walked. Now, let's just stop right there for a moment. We find ourselves at this pool called Bethesda near what's called the Sheep Gate in Jerusalem. And it shows the structural way in which it had these colonnades, these five kind of structural really barriers for them to shade those who were waiting beside the pool. And as they're lying at the pool here, it says that this pool seems to have some kind of healing power. Now you'll notice in your translations that verse 4 is skipped here, that it goes straight from verse 3 to verse 5. And the reason there's an omission there is because in the earliest manuscripts we have in the New Testament, the earliest translations the manuscripts we have that we use for our translations, they don't include that verse. That verse is kind of a footnote later added in later translations. It's kind of given to us as a way to kind of explain what's happening here. So if you notice in your Bible, you might have a footnote of verse 4, and this is what it probably says. Those were waiting for the movement of the water. For an angel went down at certain seasons to the pool and stirred the water. Whoever stepped in first after the stirring of the water was healed of whatever diseases he had. So what the Bible is saying here is it's not actually teaching us that an angel was coming down to heal these people through the water. What it's doing is it's explaining to us the belief of why these people were gathered around this pool. They had a belief that if they got into this water when it was stirred, that it could heal them. And so they waited, and we don't know exactly how it all worked. We don't know exactly how the stirring of the water worked, whether it was something underneath it or whatever caused it to stir at certain times. But these men and these women were waiting to be healed. They were waiting for the water to stir so they can go in and be healed. Now what's amazing is that archaeologists have actually found the exact location of this pool. So you can see in the picture next here, this is the actual site of this pool. So this is, again, when we read the Bible, we're reading about real places in real time that happened. It's exactly how John described it. But what's important here, guys, and this is what matters. The way the pool operated is not what's essential to the story. What's essential to the story is that Jesus worked, and that he came and he pursued this man. And we see his compassion in how he pursues him. He goes to this place. Look, Jesus didn't have to go to this place. This is not a desirable place for anyone to walk in Jerusalem to go to. He didn't just happen to stumble upon it. It didn't happen to sneak up on him. He knew exactly what he was doing while going to this pool. In the same way that he knew exactly what he was doing when he went to Samaria to the well to find the woman. It's because Jesus in his compassion always moves towards need, not comfort. Jesus in his compassion always moves towards the brokenhearted, not the self-righteous. And so he moves towards this man who is in great need. And listen to what we hear about this man. It says, this is one who had been an invalid for 38 years. Now, we're not given a lot of specifics about what caused his inability to walk. We don't know his age. We don't know how long he's necessarily been at the pool. We just know for a very long time he hasn't been able to walk, and he's been sitting by this pool hoping that this water would heal him. And look how Jesus pursues him. Verse 6. And when Jesus saw him lying there and knew that he had already been there a long time, he said to him, do you want to be healed? Jesus approaches this man. It's not the other way around. Jesus pursues this man. This man does not pursue Jesus. He doesn't seek out Jesus. He doesn't ask Jesus for anything. Jesus comes to him. And that's a profound truth of the Bible for us to understand today. That God is the one who initiates loving relationship with us. God is the one who lovingly initiates relationship with us. Always in the Bible we see that. God is the one who initiates it. Paul writes in Romans chapter 3, he says, look, no one's perfect, and no one actually seeks God. No one naturally seeks God. And you may say, well, what was that? Seems like an exaggeration. Of course people seek spiritual matters. Of course people seek God, right? What Paul's getting at is that no one in our natural state wants and desires to seek God. We may seek aspects of God, certain things we like about him, but the unfiltered God of the Bible is actually something that our souls fight against. We have an aversion to him in our souls. And the reason being is because back in Genesis chapter 3, we see this aversion develop. The serpent, he comes to Adam and Eve, and he tempts them. And what is he tempting them? He's tempting them to see that obedience to God is actually something that harms them, not helps them. He tempts them with questions. Did God really say? To show them that if they obey God, it actually is going to be more harmful. And that lie has persisted in our souls. That when we look, we see that, no, look, God is not going to be a giver of joy. He's actually a taker of it. If we draw near to him, he could actually take that from you. And so when we experience who God is in the Bible in his fullness, listen, our souls, not the God that we want him to be, what our souls will do naturally is we'll either try to mold him into something that's more digestible for our souls, or we'll just run away from him completely. But notice what God does here. He intervenes. And in each and every one of us, he has intervened lovingly into our lives. He has compassionately got close to us and got near to us to awaken us, to make the scales fall off our eyes so that we can see who he is. And he does that to this man. He pursues him in love. And we see the response of the sick man in verse 7. As Jesus is pursuing him in love, he says, sir, I have no one to put me into the pool when the water is stirred up. And while I'm going, another steps down before me. You see, when Jesus approached him and asked him, would you want to be healed? The man says, absolutely. I would greatly appreciate some assistance getting into the water. Right? Now, it seems subtle there, but there's the truth there. You see, in response to Jesus' compassion, this man is willing to collaborate with Jesus. But that's it. When Jesus asked him, do you want to be well? Do you want to be healed? His response is, yes, I would love your help getting me to the water because there I will find healing. You notice what's happening here? He's looking at Jesus as not the source of his salvation, but the means to get to his salvation. He doesn't see Jesus and he looks at him and he says, can you please help me attain my salvation by getting me to the pool instead of seeing that Jesus is his salvation? And if healing was right available to you, right in front of you like this man, wouldn't you just want to take it, right? Wouldn't it be so obvious that this man wanted healing? But Jesus asked this question for a reason, because he realizes the answer isn't as obvious as we think. Because at times, if we're honest with ourselves, we don't want to be healed of the sickness of our soul. And at other times, perhaps like this man, what we'll do is we'll say, well, you know what, Jesus? Okay, here's the thing. When life goes sideways, I'll come running to you. When life goes sideways, when the relationship that I put my hope in, when the job I put my hope in, when it doesn't actually fulfill me or live up to the expectations, then I'll come and I'll pursue you. But I'll pursue you so that you can help me get back to the water, so that you can help me get to what I want. That's what this man is ultimately asking. He is ultimately asking Jesus' help to get him to the water. And oftentimes in our lives, we do the very same thing. We're lying right by that metaphorical water which represents our perceived source of joy and salvation. Whether that's the perfect relationship or excelling in our careers or a nicer place to live, whatever it may be, whatever circumstance we're looking to, we're saying, I'm willing to team up with you, Jesus, to get to that. We're all guilty of that to some extent in our lives. We're all guilty of responding this way. approaching Jesus and asking him for help to get something in our lives, to get our lives in order, to get some kind of spiritual strength or to grow in our self-esteem, whatever it may be, we treat Jesus as the means to an end, much like this man does by the pool. He says, sure, Jesus, I'll gladly let you help me attain my salvation instead of acknowledging that you are my salvation. Sure, Jesus, I will gladly receive your help to get something that makes me feel significant and secure instead of recognizing that you are my significance, you are my security. That if I have you, I lack nothing. But you see, sometimes it's not that we want to use Jesus as a means to an end to get what we really want, but sometimes if we're just honest, we don't want to be healed of our sickness. We've grown so accustomed to it that we don't want healing. We've buried it so deep down inside of us that we don't want to bring that up. But when we get honest with our souls, we realize that the bitterness and the doubt and the fears and the regret, all the things that are in our souls, the unhealed sin and pain, it can't just go away. It has to be dealt with in some way. See, this man needed to face himself. I mean, could you just imagine for a moment, you've been lying there for year after year. For 38 years, he's been paralyzed. Guess what he has? He has the perfect excuse to do nothing. He has been in this state for so long, you can imagine that he has the perfect excuse to do nothing. He is taken care of by others. He has no plans for a future. He is sitting there. And listen, if Jesus actually heals him, which he does, that changes everything for this man. For the first time, he's got a new life. But guess what that means? For the first time, he's got to take care of himself. For the first time, he's got to get a job. For the first time, life is different for this man. So for a moment, you can actually see how it might be a shock to him that this man would actually want to heal him, that Jesus would want to heal him. It might be a shock to him because he's lived for so many years in a false reality of who he is. And in self-pity, he might actually be scared of the thought of being healed. It's not so obvious, is it? But look how Jesus comes to him. And Jesus asked him, do you want to be healed? In other words, what Jesus is trying to do, he's trying to awaken this man. He's trying to give him back a sense of freedom of choice. He's trying to awaken this man to desire change. And he's so compassionate that he doesn't wait for the man to ask for help. He goes to him. He moves towards him. This is a man who's been lying there. No one's cared about him. No one's pursued him. No one's tried to help him. And Jesus comes on the scene. And not only does he care about him, but Jesus can actually do something about it. He can actually help this man. And he takes this guy and he heals him. Jesus says, I'm not going to take you to the water because I am the water. I don't need to take you to healing because I am your healing. And what do we see happens right after that? Jesus says to him, get up, take your bed and walk. And at once the man was healed, and he took his bed and walked. Now that day was the Sabbath. So the Jews said to the man who had been healed, it is the Sabbath, it is not lawful for you to take up your bed. Now here's what's interesting. Jesus has just been compassionate towards this man. He's loved this man. He has healed this man. He has displayed his power towards this man. And immediately there's a problem. Because immediately as he is commanded to take up his mat and walk, he has broken the rabbinical laws of the day. You see, the Sabbath day was one of God's laws. God commanded that one day out of 7, we would rest from our work. It's a great gift. It's a really good thing. But the religious leaders had taken that law and they had clouded it with all these other religious regulations and what defines work. And so what they're so upset about is because one of the regulations was you literally couldn't pick up a mat and walk. That was work on the Sabbath. And so this man is breaking the law. And so the Jewish leaders, they come to him and they say, hey, I'm going to rebuke you for what you did. And this man, feeling the weight of their hard warning against him, their disapproval, what does he do? He immediately shifts the blame, right? He immediately goes, oh, that guy did it, right? And Jesus has disappeared at this moment. But we see in verse 14, Jesus finds him again. Again, Jesus is the one who pursues him. Look what he says in verse 14. It may seem like a harsh warning, but it's actually a very compassionate warning. He says, see, you are well. Sin no more, that nothing worse may happen to you. Now, there's perhaps some ambiguousness to the exact meaning. Was he talking to this guy and kind of assuming that, hey, you were sick because of something you did, and so sin no more, so that something bad doesn't happen again? It's a little ambiguous, but what is actually true here, and the point is this, that Jesus is emphasizing that there's importance to a spiritual healing to accompany his physical healing. And in fact, what Jesus is pointing out is that the physical healing was not his ultimate goal. His ultimate goal was that rather this man would believe in him and receive rest and restoration in him. He tells him to sin no more, to listen, you thought you gave me your problem, man. You thought your problem was the sickness. You thought you gave, but there's a deeper problem in your soul. You thought that ailment was what you needed from me. But you actually need something deeper. You need a peace in your soul. So stop sinning. Stop living for yourself and live for me. That's what Jesus is saying to him. And in me, you can find that ultimate peace. In me, you can find that ultimate rest. We notice this man, he fails to understand his deep problem of sin and his need for Jesus. And as soon as he recognizes Jesus' identity in this conversation, you know what he does? He goes straight to the Jewish leaders, right? Verse 15. The man went away and told the Jews that it was Jesus who had healed him. When he's questioned about carrying the mat, instead of leaping for joy for what just happened, instead of looking to Jesus with gratitude and thankfulness, he immediately is fearful of what the Jewish leaders would think of him, and then he begins to point the finger. He's immediately dismissive. No, that guy did it. Don't. It's not my problem. He did it. What we find in this man is one who lacks belief and appreciation for what Jesus has done. And listen, we can read this story and we can say, well, how dare he respond that way? How unworthy of a response of this man. I mean, he was hopeless until Jesus showed up in a compassionate way towards him and healed him. How unworthy of him to respond this way. You see, if the Bible's message was that only God saves the worthy, then we could say that. If the message of the Bible was God only saves the worthy, then sure, all the stories of the Bible will be people who responded rightly. People who said the right thing, people who summoned up great belief, who were courageous and were faithful. But what we actually have in the Bible is a set of examples of men and women who don't seek God's grace. We have examples of men and women who don't deserve God's grace. And we have examples of men and women who even after they receive God's grace, they still don't have an appreciation for it. And that is because salvation is by grace. It's not about our worthiness. And Jesus knows this. This story is all about his grace pursuing someone who is unworthy of healing. That's why he doesn't go to this man and he doesn't say, are you healthy? That's why he didn't go to this man and he didn't ask, why aren't you more healthy by now? That's why he didn't go to this man and he asked, are you worthy of me? Are you qualified? Are you religious? Because he knows the answer is that none of us are. That we are all like the people at the pool of Bethesda. They're blind, lame, and paralyzed, and we too have nothing but need. So the only question that Jesus asks of us today is, do you want to be healed? Do you want to experience my power in your life? Do you want to experience true rest for your soul? Look, I know many of us in this room have suffered some deep, tragic things in our lives. And sometimes, just like this man, when you've gone through suffering for so long, you can become so despondent that you actually begin to ponder the idea of just giving up hope. And I'm sure this man had those moments where he just gave up hope. He gave up on the idea of experiencing any kind of lasting rest or healing. I know that there's times in life where we can suffer to such deep moments that it's like a habituation to just fall into misery over and over, and it almost feels like it's normal to be miserable. And some of us might actually come to the point where we say, is it God's will for me to be miserable in this life? Well, listen, it is God's will not to give you the misery you deserve. And it is God's will to give us the favor that we don't deserve because of his grace. To give us rest for our souls. Look, all of us in this life will suffer. And all of us, no matter what we're dealing with right now, all of us until Jesus comes again, we will die of something. And we absolutely believe in stories like this, that God works in miraculous ways, and he still does today. But in the first coming of the Son of God into this world, what we receive through this story is a foretaste of his healing power. That there will be a day where the fullness of his healing is for all people, all disease, all disabilities, and that is when he comes again. And the aim of the foretaste of his healing power that we now receive is that we would then turn to him in faith and rest in him. That's what he wants for this man more than anything, is that he would turn to Jesus and rest in him. So he puts his compassion on display for this man to see. And that immediately leads to this controversy with the Jewish leaders. Look at verse 16. And this is why the Jews were persecuting Jesus, because he was doing these things on the Sabbath. But Jesus answered them, "My Father is working until now, and I am working." This was why the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because not only was he breaking the Sabbath, but he was even calling God his own Father, making him equal with God. Now, this is a pretty significant controversy. This is pretty significant what Jesus is proclaiming here. They're looking at Jesus, they're saying, "You're healing, you're working on the Sabbath," and Jesus responds, "Yeah, my Father is always working, and I'm working too." And immediately, he is claiming something here. Immediately, he is saying something about his authority here. Because they know that there's only one who could work on the Sabbath without sinning, and that is God himself. And immediately what Jesus is saying here is like, yeah, that's right. I am doing the work God does. My redemptive work, my restorating work is what the Sabbath is really all about. In other Gospels, he claims this title, that he is the Lord of the Sabbath. And what he means by that and what he is proclaiming here in John chapter 5 is that Jesus is bringing to humanity, to us, a deeper rest and salvation that the Sabbath can only point to. When Jesus calls him Lord of the Sabbath, when he says here that I am working on the Sabbath, what he is saying is I'm representing something greater than the Sabbath. I'm coming to give you something deeper than just enough energy to start again on Monday. Right? What I come is to give rest to your souls. And I know that has to hit home for us today. Because busyness is not unique to DC, but the intensity of it may be. Right? I mean, we feel it often, don't we? We feel that we're always on call, always needing to respond. We feel like we can work anywhere and everywhere, therefore we're never off the clock. And perhaps what we really need today is a Sabbath rest to remind us that we're human and not God. Yes, we need a Sabbath rest today to set aside one day to remind us that God can rule the universe without us. And he doesn't need us to be in control. There's so many blessings to experiencing rest. But what Jesus says here is, I've come to give you something deeper than just a day off. I'm coming to give you something more satisfying than just another vacation. And I know we can work, and I know the tendency for us to want to work to get the next job or to advance to the next career or to get that promotion or to attain a certain circumstance that we think if we can just get there, if we can just get into the water there, then we'll finally be worth something. We'll finally feel satisfied. We'll finally feel secure. We'll finally feel like we can rest. And then on the flip side, there's those of us who have gotten that job. We've gotten that promotion. We've obtained that circumstance in life. And we know that if we ever lose it, if it's ever taken away from us, we lose all the meaning and significance in our lives. And if that resonates with you today, if you're trying to find ultimate significance and meaning in a circumstance of your life, in a career movement, whatever it may be, listen, you'll never find rest in that. Never. It's like trying to buy lasting materials in a store that only sells fleeting goods. It will never happen. As C.S. Lewis puts it this way, there are all sorts of things in this world that offer to give you hope, but they never quite keep the promise, do they? But when you put your faith in Jesus, when you trust in Jesus to be your Sabbath rest, he gives us worth and meaning. He gives us all the hope and happiness and meaning and satisfaction that we look for in our laboring, and it's a gift given to us by faith. Does it mean we don't work hard? No, we absolutely continue to work hard. Does it mean our careers don't matter? They absolutely matter because we're created in God's image to be productive and to be creative humans. But now those things, those circumstances have the rightful place in our lives. We're not enslaved to them. But we can work with joy and rest in the promise that God has worked for us so that we can now rest in him. And so as we come to the Lord's table, my question today is, have you experienced that true rest? See, the Bible says the road to rest starts with waking up to our sin. That's what he wanted for this lame man. He wanted him to waken up to his sin so that he can experience true salvation and rest in him. That's what he wanted for this man. The way we get to Sabbath rest is by realizing, what are we working at? What are we resting in? What water are we running to for meaning and significance in our lives? And turn from that and trust in Jesus' work instead. To the one who said on the cross, "It is finished. My work has been completed for you. I lived the life that you could never live. I died the death that if you do not rest in my work, you have to undertake for me." And you can't do that. But when you trust in me, you can stop trying to earn your own righteousness because you're accepted and loved by a compassionate God who has pursued you and who has died for you and who continues to work for you. That is the promise of deep, lasting rest, to know that your salvation is secure in Jesus. Do you have that rest today? Do you have that healing of your soul? If you don't, I implore you with the words of Jesus himself, who tells us in the Gospels to come to me, all who are weary and burdened. Come to me, all who find themselves on the edge of the pool. And instead of giving up and throwing in the towel, or instead of trying to pursue those waters for significance and lasting rest that will never provide that, instead of doing that, come to me. And I, Jesus says, will give you rest. There is no one who should walk out of this room weary today, because Jesus' invitation is to heal your soul and to give you that lasting rest. So come to him, admit your helplessness, and be ready to pick up your mat and walk a life of faith. Let's pray.